So while I may joke about this, it's not really a joking matter, I get it, but it's better than crying every day. So where do we get some of this information about drugs? Well, this is where your kids' friends, not your children, your kids' friends are getting it. Arrowhead and blue light, this is the most common. So if you go to arrowhead.org, you will find what they call vaults. So if you want to learn about tobacco, well, there's not a lot in the tobacco, but boy, there's a lot in this other one, in cocaine. So this will have novel drugs of abuse. You click on this link, and it goes to a vault, telling you where to get it, how much to use, how long it lasts, what kind of high to expect, etc. What are designer drugs? So basically, they are created in what I call labs, and by labs I mean someone's bathroom, or they can be made in other labs, like in China. So basically, the reason designer drugs come about is to avoid legal consequences, if you will. It flies below the radar of the DEA and of parents, etc. And maybe because they're edgy and cool, I don't know about that for sure. So a little bit of background. Now, 30 years ago, the Controlled Substance Analog Enforcement Act was signed. And this came about because of this spate of 3-methylfentanyl, which was found in heroin, which caused a number of overdoses. So they said, we need to create this act. So here's why it's important. What is a controlled substance analog? It's something that has a similar structure, what they call substantially similar structure, substantially similar effects, and substantially similar effects on the central nervous system. But in order to fall under the Controlled Substances Analog Act, the substance must be intended for human consumption, and you will see that. So to be covered under this act, it has to be intended for humans to use. Well, what is substantially similar? So here are some similar structures with methamphetamine to DOM, but different pharmacology. Is that substantially similar? Maybe. How about this? Here's delta-9 THC, the active ingredient of marijuana, and this is a synthetic cannabinoid. Very different structures, but very similar pharmacology. So are those substantially similar? I don't know. President Obama in 2011 signed the Synthetic Drug Control Act, and this came about for a few reasons. One, for these cannabinoid agents, what we'll talk about. New hallucinogenic phenylethylamines, we're going to talk about those, and also included cathinones, we're going to talk about that, also known as bath salts. So the new act tried to address what the Controlled Substances Analog Act did not. And why did they need this? Well, buying drugs has changed, right? This is not how, well, this is how some people get their drugs, right? But this is how your kids' friends get their drugs from the internet. If you Google research drugs or research chemicals for sale on Google, the first 2 pages are all about not research chemicals, but drugs. And if you look, I think how many hits were there? 18.5 million hits when I did this. So if you Google that on the first page, you'll find this pharmaceutical company, AZ Pharmaceuticals, and you can buy oxycodone and fentanyl, PCP, find all sorts of stuff. So it's just 1 click away. Oh, maybe 2. 256-bit encryption to give your credit cards, and they'll ship it to you worldwide next day. So it's super easy to get this. These are what some of them are packaged as, and you'll notice, what do they all say on them? Not for human consumption. Not FDA approved for human consumption. Therefore, they evade the Controlled Substances Act, because these are not intended for human consumption, but of course, they're intended for human consumption, right? All right, so what's the first class? Phenylethylamine. Where do they get this name? A phenyl group, an ethyl chain, and an amine group, phenylethylamine. And these also known as the 2C compounds. Why 2C? 2 carbon. 2 carbon compounds are phenylethylamines. This is where most of the designer drugs, the class of largest designer drugs. And the reason is that there are effectively unlimited substitutions on either the phenyl, ethyl, or amine group, whereby you can create new drugs. And so if the government bans this drug, well, you simply make a substitution. Now you've got a new drug, and now it's no longer covered. That's why they created these drug acts. Phenylethylamines are psychedelics. They may be enactogens, which make you feel really groovy and with your emotions. Basically, they're hallucinogens and stimulants. What are some of them? MPA. So this is effectively methamphetamine with a substituted diol. We first saw this in 2010. And basically, it's a stimulant, but instead of making you super whack, it's supposedly more clear-headed. And all of these phenylethylamines cause tachycardia, diaphoresis, agitation, sweating, etc. All right, does anyone know who this is? Yeah. How do you know that?
I would be him if I had gone to med school.
Okay. He said he would have been this guy if he hadn't gone to med school. This is Sasha Shulgren. He wrote 2 books. PCOL stands for phenylethylamines I have known and loved, and TCOL, tryptamines I have known and loved. He's the father of drug design. He actually has a PhD, and he's credited with creating more than 200 psychotropic drugs. All right, you all have heard of bath salts, and my daughter has bath. They're called bath. It's actually things she puts in the bathtub with her, but these are different. These are cathinones, and there are 2 major cathinones, methadone and MDPV, and they've got cool names like Purple Wave. They're sold in neat packages like this. This is their chemical structure. You can see they're structurally similar to ecstasy. MDPV is. But you've heard of bath salts because they make people crazy. You'll recall, I think it's been about 8 years, that man in Florida who was high on bath salts and literally ate the face off another individual. You can actually find those pictures online. I decided not to show them, but literally ate the face off of an individual. So there's been a lot of stuff in the press about bath salts and people acting crazy. So they are norepinephrine and dopamine reuptake inhibitors. And they all cause hallucinations, paranoia. We have seen MIs in patients who use this. We have had patients who have acute strokes. There is they found increased suicidality in patients who use this, whether they're high on them at the time or afterwards. So these really mess with your neurochemicals. Here's an example of a patient who was an artist. This is a self-portrait. And then when high on bath salts, he created another self-portrait. So you see, it's kind of crazy. Now, all of these designer drugs, whether it's a bath salt, whether it's a phenylethylamines or whatever, the treatment is all the same. And effectively, you've got to chill them out. And you can chill them out with whatever you have. Sometimes when they're super agitated, you need to put them down quickly with ketamine and then something else. But whether you use benzos or barbs or propofol, it doesn't matter as long as you chill them out. Now, they may have electrolyte abnormalities, hyponatremia, hyperkalemia, and then if they're really hyperthermic, you need to put them down with neuromuscular blockers, so vecuronium, rocuronium, etc. If you stop the muscle activity, you will cool them down very rapidly. All right, so let's talk a little bit about testing. You're not going to find this on your testing. None of the point-of-care drugs of abuse screens will detect cathinones. In fact, virtually no hospital will detect these at all. NMS labs, ARUP labs, and specialty labs can identify these from urine. Urine is a preferred matrix to find drugs of abuse of any kind. Drugs are generally concentrated in the urine. So you will find much higher concentrations in urine than in blood. So if you want to test someone, test their urine, but you're not going to find these except for specialized testing. And there's really no indication to do it, right? Someone's acting totally crazy. Once they're not crazy, you can ask them what they use. All right. So I get lots of questions as a toxicologist about drug testing. And I'm asked by psychiatrists and others to do a drugs of abuse test, and I'll say why. It's not going to change anything. It has very bad sensitivity, very poor specificity. Why do a test that's horrible? So drugs of abuse, urine drugs of abuse tests, they were developed, the Department of Transportation in the 1970s. they typically, there are different versions, but they typically test for these substances, all right? Benzoylecgonine, that is a metabolite of cocaine. It's an immunoassay antibody against cocaine metabolite. It tests for antibodies against morphine. So things that don't react with morphine will never be positive. Demerol, you won't detect. Fentanyl, you won't detect. Buprenorphine, you won't detect. Dilaudid does cross-react with morphine. So if you suspect someone of using something else, a non-morphine derived opiate, it won't be positive, so why do the test? Doesn't make any sense to me. One of the biggest pet peeves of mine is the benzo testing. So it's an immunoassay against oxazepam, which is in itself its own benzo, but it's a metabolite of Valium. About 50% of the benzos do not metabolize oxazepam. So the sensitivity of the benzo screening is about 50%. So why do the test? Makes no sense to me. So that's why I say that because of the false positives and false negatives, that drugs of abuse testing is pretty lousy and really it doesn't change patients' care. I find it funny when a patient comes in for, I don't know, they've got cellulitis and they also inject IV drugs, and the psychiatrist wants a drugs of abuse screen. How about you just ask the patient, right? They'll tell you what they used. All right, so let's talk about some of the other, this is in our Tox Fellows office, the very legal. So let's talk about K2 and spice. There's a lot of confusion about what that is. This is J.W. Hoffman. He's a chemist, and his initials are JWH. So he created a whole bunch of cannabinomimetic drugs. So these are drugs that activate the cannabinoid receptor, effectively trying to get you high like marijuana without having a positive drug screen. And they're the JWH compounds. This actually started in the military about 15 years ago. They noticed some military members acting kind of crazy. You do a urine drug screen, there's no THC, and it was an effort to avoid having positive THC screens. So K2 and spice have kind of different names, but in general, K2 is a powder. If you put it on something and then smoke that something, they call it spice. That's at least traditionally how it's been viewed. So here's what they look like. So this is THC, and this is one of the JWH compounds. So you see it's structurally, I know it's drawn on the side, but it's structurally very similar, and there are a bunch of these. Now THC is a partial agonist at cannabinoid receptors, cannabinoid type 1. These JWH compounds are generally full agonists, and that may be why that people have kind of more profound effects and can get addicted as well. Now these have been banned, but you can still get these everywhere. And one of the issues with these designer drugs is you don't know exactly what's in them, right? Are they 99% pure? Are they 50% pure? So you don't know exactly what you're getting, and that therefore dosing can be difficult. And that's why Arrowhead is really popular, because it'll tell you exactly how much to use to get a desired effect. Now obviously they're off a bit, but it's a good place to start. So these JWH compounds are not detected on urine screens. They're like marijuana, but they don't trip the immunoassay positive for marijuana. So they avoid screens. You send urine for specialty lab testing. ARUP, NMS labs can detect some of the JWH compounds. Again, I would say, why bother? It doesn't really matter, but you can do it. Now, interestingly, some stuff has come up recently on 2 major occasions. Things have appeared in K2 and spice. So you may recall last year, I think it was September, about 100 patients on the New Haven Green were found like acting weird, falling down, and there's a video of like a reporter talking like, oh no, there's someone right there. So it was more than 100 patients presented to Yale New Haven and St. Raphael's Hospital. And they determined what was in it was Fubinaca. Has anyone heard of Fubinaca before? Ike has, and that's about it. Yeah, Fubinaca is a real thing. It first came out, it's also known as, there's a version called AMD Fubinaca. You may have heard of the zombie apocalypse that occurred in New York a few years ago. That was a bunch of people using spice with Fubinaca in it. And So Fubinaca is structurally similar to marijuana, but again, it's just like super spice, and people act crazy. They get this zombie-like trance, they become nonverbal, they kind of walk around stumbling, and that's why people thought it was the zombie apocalypse. Fubinaca. All right. Who uses drugs? Not here in the room, but who uses drugs? Rock stars use a lot of drugs. So a little trivia here to see who knows their drugs or their rock and roll. Who is it? Janis Joplin. Yep. Jim Morrison. Jimi Hendrix. They get a little harder. Nice. Sid Vicious from the Sex Pistols. Very good. Nope. He's dead. Nope. Several brothers started this band. The Ramones. Yes, Dee Dee Ramone. Yep. All right, the hardest one. A rock critic. He was also a musician, widely considered the first and best rock critic of all time. He occurs in a song by R.E.M. Where's my volume? I've got this here. Let's see if it plays. All right, if not here, I'll turn up the volume. All right. It's Lester Bangs. So when they say Lenny Bruce, Lester Bangs, all those people in that song have, Leonard Bernstein, have LB as their initials. So that was Lester Bangs, was a rock and roll critic for Rolling Stone and died of an overdose. Okay, but the person who used the most drugs of probably any human on earth was Elvis Presley. They found about 17 drugs or metabolites in his comprehensive tox screen. While we don't know for sure what killed Elvis, the king, one drug was thought to contribute the most to it. Does anyone know the drug? Yeah, barbiturates. Not a barb. Close though. It's an old school drug. You guys are really close. There is. You can still get this on the internet, and you can get it in Mexico. Placidil, also known as ethchlorovinyl, which is a benzobarb-like drug. All right. All right, let's talk. Anyone heard of bromo dragonfly? Yeah, so this is some nasty stuff. This is a phenylethylamine, a 2C compound. It's super potent, 300 times more potent than mescaline, which comes from the peyote cactus. I tell you, if I know I'm about to die, I'm trying peyote for sure. So it's sold on these blotters. I'll show you what the blotters look like. And this is some nasty stuff that causes vaso-occlusive disease and gangrene. I'll show you some pictures. And this is a great quote from one guy who used it. It was like being dragged to hell and back again. It is the most evil thing I've ever tried. It lasted an eternity. Sounds awesome. So this is the vaso-occlusive that you can get from using from bromo dragonfly. And it's sold on these little blotters. This is a dime. You can see how small they are. That's President Obama. I tried to see if there are any blotters with Trump on it, but there aren't any. I don't know why. So another thing that's coming around are these novel fentanyl analogs. There's lots of them, right? There was 3-methylfentanyl, which started the Controlled Substance Analog Act. Well, there's new ones. Acetylfentanyl has made a big comeback. It is super potent. And how did we learn this? So we were seeing, around the Massachusetts-Rhode Island border, we were seeing a number of drug overdoses of patients who needed a lot of naloxone, 6, 8, 10, 12 milligrams in order to wake up. Like, that's a bit unusual. So they talked to toxicologists, and we did some testing. We determined that there was a novel fentanyl analog in the heroin. Now, interestingly, there are now tests for fentanyl. But if you do a regular drug screen, it's going to be negative. if you do an ELISA, if you do this new urine drug screen for fentanyl, it will be positive. But if you do try to quantify the amount of fentanyl with GC-Max spec, it will be negative. So it gets confusing. So that's why these drug tests are not very accurate, right? False positives and false negatives. So if you have someone who needs now more than 2 milligrams to wake up, there is probably some novel fentanyl analog. And we know that about 70% of heroin now has some novel fentanyl analogs in it, of varying degrees. But it's not just acetylfentanyl. Now there's a new fentanyl analog out called carfentanil. Does anyone know what its trade name is? It's called Wildnil. It was for large animal tranquilization. And this is now in some of the heroin. In fact, last year, 1 kilo of this was confiscated at Vancouver's airport from China. 1 kilo, this is 10,000 times more potent than morphine. So this thing had a street value of over 30 million bucks for 2 pounds. And it's enough to kill thousands of people. So what's the future of these drug screens and these drugs? Well, it's really the 2C compounds. It's the phenylethylamines. That they will keep changing various structures on here to avoid detection by drug enforcement, to avoid detection by drug screens, and to continue to have something that's new and edgy and cool for the friends of your kids to use. So you can find these easily on the internet. I removed it actually this morning. I tried to buy some on eBay, so you can get Salvia divinorum on eBay. You can find some of these plants on eBay, and for about 30 bucks. So if you have super agitated patients, so in general, like if there's some guy running around naked on some main street, that he's used one of these, right? I mean, that just doesn't happen otherwise. So if you see a really agitated patient, especially if they're febrile, think of some novel phenylethylamine or some other new sympathomimetic. You need to chill them out with benzos or ketamine or something. If they're febrile, paralyze them with neuromuscular blockers. And then consider calling your friendly toxicologist, not only to get some help with it, but also for kind of epidemiologic purposes. And we may recommend at times sending urine for some sophisticated novel drug testing. We do some work with NMS Labs doing that at UMass. So in summary, these are this legal gray area. They may be prohibited substances, maybe they're not, maybe they're so new. That's why they're labeled not for human consumption, so they avoid the regulatory efforts. We are going to continue to see these for some time because people have a lot of ingenuity in designing these and creating new markets for their products. I'm from Illinois originally, but I've lived in Massachusetts for 20 years, so I am a masshole for sure. And so I look forward to the Patriots winning another Super Bowl. Thanks, everyone.